We were wondering if you would be our dad.
Of course I will.
Come here.
The school courtyard was already loud before the assembly even began. Children shuffled into lines, sneakers scraping concrete, teachers shouting names, parents lingering near the gate. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning at a public school most people only noticed when something went wrong. Then the black luxury car rolled in. It didn't belong here. Too clean, too quiet, too expensive for a place where cracked paint and second-hand backpacks told a different story. Heads turned, phones lifted, whispers spread like wildfire. A young black man stepped out. Not old money, not inherited power. This was the kind of confidence you earned the hard way. Sharp suit, calm eyes, a self-made millionaire invited to speak about success, discipline, and what's possible. Teachers smiled, students stared, some parents nodded in approval. Standing near the front of the crowd were two identical black twins, no older than 8. Malik and Micah, same faces, same shy posture, same hands locked together like they were afraid one might disappear without the other. They had heard the whispers too. They had seen the car, and in their small chests something dangerous grew, hope. As the principal praised the guests' achievements, the twins barely listened. Their eyes never left the man on stage. To everyone else he was rich. To them he looked safe. When the microphone opened for questions, silence fell. Then without warning, the twins stepped out of line. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A teacher reached out too late. Malik spoke first, his voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "Mister, can you be our dad?" The words hit the air like a slap. Laughter burst from the back rows. A few parents looked away, embarrassed. Someone whispered, "That's inappropriate." Another muttered, "Kids these days." Micah swallowed hard and added, "If you don't have one already, we don't have one." The millionaire froze. Every eye locked onto him. Cameras zoomed in. The moment stretched thin, uncomfortable, raw. The twins didn't cry. They just stood there waiting, like kids who had already learned not to expect much. The man slowly stepped down from the stage, his expression unreadable, not angry, not amused. He looked at the twins, then at the laughing crowd. And when he finally spoke, his first sentence was what anyone expected. What he said next would silence the entire school and change these boys' lives forever. What they didn't know would change everything. Malik and Micah Johnson had learned early how to take up less space. They walked the school hallways side by side, shoulders slightly hunched, backpacks worn thin from years of use. Teachers often mixed them up. Classmates treated them like a matched set instead of two separate boys, and most days that was fine. Being twins meant never being alone. It meant safety. But it also meant sharing the same wound. Their classroom walls were covered in drawings of families, stick figures holding hands, smiling parents with wide arms. On those days, Malik held the crayon while Micah watched. They never drew a father, not because they couldn't imagine one, but because imagining hurt too much. Their dad had died in a factory accident when they were barely old enough to remember his voice. Their mother tried to hold everything together, 2 jobs, late nights, constant exhaustion. Then sickness came quietly, like it often does in families already struggling. Within a year, she was gone too. After that, it was just Grandma. Mrs. Johnson was strong in the way people had to be when nobody came to save them. Her hands were rough from years of cleaning houses. Her back ached, but she never complained in front of the boys. She packed their lunches carefully, kissed their foreheads every morning, and reminded them to be good, be kind, and don't give anyone a reason to look down on you. But love couldn't hide everything. At school, the boys noticed the differences. Other kids talked about dads picking them up in trucks, dads yelling from the sidelines, dads coming to career day in uniforms or suits. Malik and Micah learned to stay quiet during those conversations. Father's Day was the worst. The school tried to be inclusive, but the room still filled with grown men and loud laughter. The twins sat together at the back, pretending to be fascinated by their shoelaces. Teachers avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say. Pity hung heavier than silence. Some kids weren't so gentle. "Where your dad at? Y'all got 2 moms or something. Guess nobody wanted you." Most of the time, the twins didn't respond. Fighting meant trouble, and trouble meant Grandma worrying. Still, the words sank in, quietly, deeply. They weren't just missing a father, they were missing proof that they mattered. That's why the announcement of a special guest shook their world. A young black millionaire, self-made, coming to talk about success. To the school, it was a win, good publicity, inspiration, proof that greatness could come from anywhere, even here. To Malik and Micah, it was something else entirely. They saw his picture on a flyer taped to the hallway wall. Clean-cut, confident, not smiling too wide. Something about his eyes felt familiar, like someone who had seen struggle and survived it. That night, the twins lay in bed whispering. "Do you think he got kids?" Micah asked. Malik shrugged, "Probably." "What if he do?" They didn't finish the thought. They didn't have to. Twins shared more than DNA. They shared hope without naming it. Evan Cole, meanwhile, wasn't thinking about children at all. To the world, Evan was a success story. Foster care to fortune, hustle to headlines. He had built his company from nothing, learned to trust numbers more than people, and kept his private life locked away from interviews and cameras. School visits weren't his thing. He agreed to this one because his assistant insisted, because the neighborhood felt familiar, because somewhere deep down, he remembered being a kid sitting on a cold, folding chair, listening to men talk about futures he couldn't see. Evan had grown up without a father, too. Different story, same absence. He remembered the questions that followed him everywhere. Who takes care of you? Where are your parents? Why don't they visit? Every answer felt like a confession. Every explanation made him feel smaller. So he learned independence early. Learn not to ask, learn not to need. That morning, as Evan adjusted his cuffs and stepped out of the car, he noticed the way the kids looked at him. Not just curiosity, expectation. It made him uncomfortable. Inside the school gates, Malik and Micah watched him walk toward the stage. Their hands found each other automatically. Whatever they were about to do, they would do it together. Because when the world kept reminding you of what you didn't have, sometimes the bravest thing wasn't staying quiet. Sometimes it was asking. And none of them, not the boys, not the school, not Evan himself, understood yet how heavy that question would become once it was spoken out loud. The silence after the twins' question felt heavier than the noise that came before it. For a brief moment, the entire school courtyard seemed to forget how to breathe. Laughter died mid-burst. A teacher's sharp intake of breath cut through the air. Phones that had been raised for fun suddenly froze, their screens now capturing something raw and uncomfortable. Malik and Micah stood still, shoulders squared, hands no longer holding each other. They had stepped apart without realizing it, as if bracing for impact. Years of disappointment had trained them well. Ask, wait, accept whatever comes. The principal recovered first. This is inappropriate," she said quickly, forcing a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Boys, you need to step back right now." A few parents nodded in agreement. Someone muttered, "That's embarrassing." Another whispered, "Where's their guardian?" The twins didn't move. Malik swallowed, his throat dry. He hadn't planned to speak again, but the fear of being dismissed burned hotter than the fear of rejection. "We didn't mean bad," he said, voice cracking just enough for people to notice. We don't got one." Micah clenched his fists at his sides. "Everybody else do." That was when Evan Cole finally reacted. He hadn't laughed, he hadn't smiled, he hadn't looked away. From the moment the words left the boys' mouths, his body had gone still, like someone bracing for an old memory to hit. The polished confidence he wore so easily slipped, just slightly, revealing something unsettled underneath. He raised his hand. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough to stop the principal mid-step. "Give me a second," Evan said calmly. The authority in his voice surprised even him. The principal hesitated, then nodded, stepping back. The crowd murmured, uncertain whether this was part of the program or a mistake spiraling out of control. Evan stepped down from the stage. The distance between him and the twins wasn't far, but it felt longer than it should have. Each step echoed in his chest. He remembered walking toward adults like this as a child, hoping, and how dangerous hope could be. He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to their height. "What are your names?" he asked. Malik, one said. Micah, the other followed. "You brothers?" Evan asked, though the answer was obvious. "We twins," Micah said. Evan nodded slowly. He glanced around, noticing how the crowd leaned in, hungry for a reaction, for drama, for something to clip and post. He didn't give it to them. Instead, he asked quietly, "Who told you to ask me that?" "No one," Malik said quickly. "We decided." "Why?" Evan asked. The question was simple, but it landed hard. Micah looked at Malik. Malik looked back. That silent twin conversation passed between them. Do we say it or do we stop now? Malik answered. "'Cause you came," he said. "Most people don't." A ripple went through the crowd. Some adults shifted uncomfortably. A teacher folded her arms tighter. Evan felt the words settle deep in his chest. He straightened slightly and looked up at the audience now, his expression sharpening. "This isn't funny," he said. The laughter that had lingered at the edges vanished completely. "And it's not a joke," Evan continued. "So if anyone here thinks it is, that says more about you than it does about them." A few parents looked away, suddenly interested in their phones. One of the boys who had laughed earlier dropped his gaze to the ground. Malik and Micah stood frozen, unsure whether they were being defended or corrected. Evan turned back to them. "Listen," he said, his tone gentler but firm. "You don't ask something like that unless you really mean it." "We mean it," Micah said quickly, too quickly. Evan studied their faces. He saw it then, not manipulation, not attention-seeking. He saw exhaustion. He saw children who had learned to be brave too early. "Do you know what you're asking?" he asked. Malik nodded. "Someone to come to school stuff," he said. "Someone who don't leave." That did it. Evan stood up. The movement alone commanded attention. He looked at the principal, then at the teachers, then at the parents lining the fence. "This conversation doesn't belong in front of a crowd," he said evenly. "Especially not a crowd that thinks kids asking for stability is entertainment." The principal flushed. "Mr. Cole, with all due respect." "With all due respect," Evan interrupted, still calm. "These boys didn't disrupt your assembly. The truth did." The tension spiked instantly. Phones came back up. Whispers turned urgent. The neat little school event had cracked open into something messy and uncontrollable. "Boys," the principal said sharply, "go back to your line." Malik hesitated. Micah looked at Evan one last time. "We sorry," he said quietly. Evan shook his head. "Don't be." The twins turned and walked back, heads held high despite the heat burning their ears. Every step felt like a walk of shame, but also relief. They had asked. That part was done. The assembly ended early. Classes were dismissed to classrooms in awkward silence. Teachers avoided the twins' eyes. Some kids whispered, others stared. A few looked thoughtful, as if seeing something for the first time. Malik and Micah sat at their desks, not talking. They didn't know what would happen next, only that something had changed. In the hallway, Evan was stopped by the principal. "I'm going to need a word," she said tightly. "So will I," Evan replied. They stepped into her office. The door closed. The hum of the school returned outside, but inside the air was thick. "You put us in a difficult position," the principal said. "I didn't," Evan answered. "Reality did." She sighed. "They crossed a boundary." "They expressed a need," Evan corrected. "There's a difference." "You can't encourage that kind of behavior," she said. "We have policies." Evan leaned against the desk. "Policies don't raise kids," he said. "People do." The principal rubbed her temple. "We don't even know their home situation." "I'd like to," Evan said. She looked up sharply. "Why?" Evan paused. Because he saw himself. Because he knew what it felt like to be invisible. Because success had taught him everything except how to stop caring. "Because they asked me," he said simply. The principal studied him for a long moment. "Their guardian will need to be contacted," she said, "and this can't turn into some spectacle." Evan almost laughed. "It already has," he said. By lunchtime, the story was spreading. A short clip of the twins asking their question had already made its way online. Captions ranged from mocking to outraged. Some people called the boys disrespectful. Others called Evan heartless for not answering immediately. No one knew the full story. Malik and Micah didn't see the video. They sat alone at lunch, pushing food around their trays. "Do you think he mad?" Micah asked quietly. Malik shook his head, though he wasn't sure. He said, "Don't be sorry." That don't mean yes, Micah said. I know. Across the city, Evan sat in the back seat of his car, phone buzzing nonstop. Messages from his assistant, from investors, from people who suddenly had opinions about children they had never met. He closed his eyes. The question echoed in his head again. Can you be our dad? He had spent his whole life learning how not to need anyone. Now 2 kids had asked him to be something he had never had himself. And for the first time in a long time, Evan Cole didn't know what the right answer was. By the time school let out, the air around Malik and Micah felt different. Not louder, not crueler, just heavier. Kids passed them in the hallway without their usual jokes. A few stared. A few whispered. One girl smiled at them softly, then quickly looked away like she wasn't sure she was allowed to care. The twins packed their bags slowly, moving in sync without meaning to. Malik folded his worksheet twice before shoving it into his backpack. Micah kept checking the door, half expecting the principal to call them back to the office. She gonna call Grandma, Micah said under his breath. Yeah, Malik replied. She always do. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every step echoed with the memory of laughter, of silence, of the way the man's face had changed when they asked. Not angry, not kind either, something else, something complicated. At home, Mrs. Johnson was already waiting. She stood near the kitchen sink, arms crossed, jaw tight. The phone sat on the counter beside her like evidence. She didn't raise her voice. That scared them more than yelling ever could. Sit, she said. They sat. The principal's words replayed through her explanation. Inappropriate, public disruption, emotional boundaries. Mrs. Johnson listened as the twins tried to explain, talking over each other, voices cracking. We didn't mean trouble, Malik said. We just asked, Micah added. He ain't even say no. Mrs. Johnson closed her eyes slowly. When she opened them, they were wet but controlled. Babies, she said quietly, you don't ask strangers to be your parents. He wasn't a stranger, Micah said before he could stop himself. He knew how it felt. Mrs. Johnson stared at him. How you know that? Micah shrugged. We could tell. Silence filled the room. Mrs. Johnson sighed, the weight of years settling into her shoulders. I know you hurting, she said, but the world don't always respond gentle when you show it. The boys nodded. They knew that already. Later that night, Evan Cole sat alone in his apartment, suit jacket draped over a chair, tie loosened but not removed. He replayed the footage he hadn't wanted to watch. The twins' voices sounded smaller through his phone speaker, younger, more fragile. The comments underneath made his stomach turn. Some called the boys brave, others cruel. A few blamed Evan, many blamed the parents the kids didn't have. He locked his phone and stared out at the city lights. His assistant had called twice, his publicist once, all asking the same thing, how do you want to handle this? Evan didn't answer. Because this wasn't a brand issue, this was personal. He remembered being 9 years old, sitting in a counselor's office, asking if he could stay longer at a foster home because the man there fixed his bike and didn't yell. He remembered the way the counselor smiled sadly and said, "That's not how it works." He remembered learning in that moment that wanting something didn't make it possible. And yet those boys had asked anyway. The next morning, Evan went back to the school. Unannounced. The secretary looked startled when she saw him. Mr. Cole, we weren't expecting. I know, he said. I'm here to speak to the boy's guardian. Mrs. Johnson arrived an hour later, suspicion written across her face. She expected lectures, condescension, maybe even threats. What she didn't expect was Evan standing when she entered the room. You raised 2 brave boys, he said. She blinked. Brave don't always mean smart, she replied cautiously. No, Evan agreed, but it usually means honest. They talked. Not as millionaire and struggling grandmother, not as guest speaker and parent, just 2 adults carrying different versions of the same absence. Mrs. Johnson told him everything, the jobs, the sickness, the nights she cried quietly so the boys wouldn't hear, the fear that she wouldn't live long enough to see them grown. Evan listened. Then he told her about foster homes, about sleeping with shoes on, about learning early that people left. I'm not here to replace you, he said, and I'm not here to promise something I can't keep. Mrs. Johnson studied him carefully. Then why you here? Evan paused. Because they asked, he said, and because someone should have listened when I did. Word spread quickly that Evan had returned. Teachers whispered, parents speculated, the twins were called out of class, hearts pounding. When they entered the office and saw Evan sitting beside their grandmother, Malik froze. Micah whispered, "We in trouble." "No," Mrs. Johnson said softly, "sit." Evan turned to face them. He didn't smile, he didn't frown. "I owe you an answer," he said. The boys nodded, bracing themselves. "I can't be your dad," Evan continued. Micah's shoulders slumped instantly. Malik stared at the floor. "But not because I don't want to," Evan said, "and not because you did anything wrong." They looked up. "Being a dad isn't about showing up once," Evan said. "It's about staying, and staying means doing things the right way." Hope flickered again, cautious and afraid. "I can't promise you something today that takes years to prove," Evan continued. "But I can promise this, I won't disappear." Mrs. Johnson watched the boys carefully. Tears gathered in her eyes. Evan explained boundaries. Mentorship, time, legal steps, no secrets, no cameras, no shortcuts. "I won't lie to you," he said. "This won't be easy, and you don't owe me anything." Malik swallowed. "We just wanted someone to come to school stuff." Evan nodded. "I can do that." Micah whispered, "Even if we mess up." "Especially then," Evan said. The room was quiet for a long time. This wasn't a fairy tale. No papers were signed. No hugs yet, just understanding, just possibility. Outside the office, the school buzzed with rumors. Inside, something steadier was forming. Not a miracle. A beginning. And though none of them said it out loud, they all felt it. The moment when a question asked in desperation became the first step toward something real. The first change didn't announce itself. It didn't come with applause, headlines, or big promises. It arrived quietly on a Tuesday afternoon when Malik and Micah walked out of school and saw Evan Cole standing near the gate. No cameras, no suit. Just him. He wore a simple jacket, hands in his pockets, scanning the crowd like someone unsure if they were standing in the right place. For a second, the twins wondered if they were imagining him. Micah stopped walking. Malik followed his gaze, his breath caught. "That's him," he whispered. Before either of them could move, Evan spotted them. He lifted a hand in a small wave, not confident, not flashy, just present. Mrs. Johnson noticed too. Her step slowed. Suspicion rose first, instinctively, then something softer followed. "I said I'd come," Evan said when they reached him. "Hope that's okay." Mrs. Johnson nodded carefully. "You said school stuff." "This counts," Evan replied. The walk home felt strange. Evan didn't lead. He didn't trail behind. He matched their pace, listening as the boys talked about math quizzes and a kid who kept stealing pencils. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to impress. At the apartment, Evan didn't step inside. He stopped at the door. "I'll come by again," he said, "if that's still all right." Malik nodded quickly. Micah hesitated, then nodded too. That night, the twins lay awake longer than usual. "He really came," Micah whispered. "Yeah," Malik said. "He could have just said it." But he didn't. The next few weeks unfolded like that, slow, deliberate, almost awkward. Evan came to school pickups when he could. He sat quietly at the back of a parent meeting. He showed up to Malik's spelling bee and Micah's science presentation. Sometimes he brought snacks. Sometimes he forgot and apologized. Kids noticed. At first it was confusion, then curiosity, then envy. "Who that?" one boy asked. "Y'all rich now?" another joked. The twins didn't know how to answer. Evan wasn't their dad, not officially, not yet, but he was there. And presence changed things. Teachers treated them differently, not better, but more carefully. Less pity, more awareness. A few apologized quietly for past moments they hadn't handled well. But not everyone was comfortable. One afternoon, a parent cornered the principal. "Is this appropriate?" she asked sharply. "A single man hanging around kids that aren't his." The words traveled fast. By the end of the week, Evan was asked to meet with the school board. He expected resistance. What he didn't expect was how personal it felt. They asked about his intentions. his background, his motives. I'm not adopting them, Evan said evenly. I'm mentoring with their guardian's knowledge. That's a slippery slope, someone said. So is ignoring kids who ask for help, Evan replied. Outside the school walls, the internet hadn't let the story die. Another clip surfaced, then another. Commentary grew louder, harsher. Some praised Evan for stepping up. Others accused him of chasing attention. A few questioned the twins' grandmother, implying desperation. Mrs. Johnson stopped reading comments after someone wrote that the boys were lucky scraps begging for leftovers. She cried that night. Evan found out days later. He didn't say much. He just sat with her listening. I don't want them pitied, she said. I want them protected. So do I, Evan replied. Still, doubt crept in. Late at night, Evan wondered if he was doing more harm than good. If he was reopening wounds he couldn't heal. If one day, despite his best intentions, he would become another man who left. The twins felt it too. They started testing him, not consciously but instinctively. Micah skipped homework one night. Malik snapped at a teacher. Small acts of rebellion waiting to see what would happen. Evan didn't yell, he didn't disappear. He talked. Why'd you do that? He asked Micah. Micah shrugged, didn't feel like it. Evan nodded. Okay, still gotta do it. That was it. No threats, no lectures, just expectation. Something inside the boys shifted. For the first time, rules didn't feel like punishment. They felt like care. But the rising tension wasn't just inside the house or the school. It was building in the space between Evan's old life and this new one. His assistant warned him about optics. His investors questioned his focus. This isn't your responsibility, one said. You didn't cause their situation. Evan thought of Malik's voice, someone who don't leave. I know, he answered, but I can choose what I do next. The boys' classmates noticed changes too. Malik raised his hand more. Micah smiled easier. Bullies backed off, not out of fear, but because the twins carried themselves differently now. Still, whispers followed them. You think he gonna stay? He probably just doing it for show. Rich people always leave. Malik overheard those words one afternoon and didn't tell Micah. That night he stared at the ceiling, fear creeping back in. Because hope, once revived, hurt more when threatened. The first real crack came on a Friday. Evan was supposed to attend a school open house. Malik and Micah had told everyone he was coming. But Evan didn't show. Minutes passed, then an hour. Mrs. Johnson checked her phone, no message. Micah's eyes darted toward the door every time it opened. Malik sat still, jaw clenched. By the time they walked home, neither spoke. Evan arrived late, too late. A meeting had run long. His phone died. Excuses that sounded reasonable but felt empty in the boy's ears. I waited, Micah said quietly. Evan froze. I know, he said, and I'm sorry. Malik didn't look at him. It's okay, he said, too fast, too practiced. Evan felt it then, the damage a single absence could cause. That night he didn't sleep. He realized something that scared him more than any boardroom battle ever had. Showing up once was easy. Showing up every time was the real test. And somewhere between missed meetings and quiet disappointments, the line between mentor and father was blurring, whether any of them were ready to admit it or not. The missed open house changed the temperature of everything. It didn't explode into arguments or tears. It settled quietly like dust after something breaks. Malik and Micah didn't bring it up again. That worried Evan more than anger ever could. The boys became polite in a way that felt distant. They still greeted Evan when he came by, still listened, still followed rules, but the easy chatter faded. Malik answered questions with shrugs. Micah stopped asking if Evan would come tomorrow. Mrs. Johnson noticed it too. They protecting themselves, she said one evening after the boys went to bed. Kids learn fast when promises get shaky. Evan nodded, guilt pressing into his chest. I don't want to be another lesson like that. Then don't, she said simply. The next week, Evan made changes. He blocked off time on his calendar the way he would for a major investor. School pickups, parent meetings, homework nights, non-negotiable. His assistant protested. His bored, raised eyebrows, Evan didn't bend. When Malik had a math test, Evan sat at the table drilling flashcards until Malik groaned. When Micah struggled with reading, Evan listened patiently, even when Micah snapped in frustration. "You ain't my dad," Micah blurted out one night. The words hung in the air. Evan didn't flinch. "You right," he said calmly, "but I'm still here." Micah stared at him, searching for cracks. Finding none, he went back to reading. Slowly, the wall softened. At school, rumors intensified. Some parents complained openly now. One accused Evan of confusing the boys. Another claimed the twins were getting special treatment. A teacher quietly defended them. "They're just getting what other kids already have," she said. "Consistency." The school board scheduled another meeting. This time, Mrs. Johnson attended. She spoke softly but firmly about loss, about community, about how raising black boys without support felt like trying to outrun a storm with no shelter. "I'm not asking him to replace me," she said, eyes steady. "I'm asking you why you're more uncomfortable with a man showing up than with children growing up unseen." The room went quiet. Outside the school, the internet roared louder. An opinion piece painted Evan as a savior chasing validation. Another accused Mrs. Johnson of exploiting him. A viral comment suggested the twins were being trained for sympathy. Malik overheard kids repeating it. "They say we begging," he told Micah one afternoon, fists clenched. Micah shook his head. "We didn't beg, we asked." "But they don't care." That night, Malik exploded over a small thing, a broken pencil, a wrong answer. He slammed his book shut and stormed off. Evan followed him to the balcony. "You mad at me or them?" Evan asked. Malik stared out at the street. "Everybody." Evan nodded. "That makes sense." "I hate when people talk about us like we ain't there," Malik said. "Like we broken." "You're not," Evan said firmly. "You're kids who went through too much." Malik's voice cracked. "Then why it feel like everything good gotta leave?" Evan had no perfect answer. So he told the truth. "Because losing people teaches you to expect it," he said. "But expectation ain't destiny." Malik wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. Evan didn't comment. The following month brought another test. Career Day. The same event that had quietly humiliated the twins before. This time, Evan was scheduled to attend, not as a guest speaker, but as Malik and Micah's mentor. The boys didn't mention it. They didn't want to hope again. That morning, Evan arrived early. He stood beside them in the auditorium as other parents filled seats. Some stared, some whispered. Evan stayed still. When Malik's teacher called his name, Malik hesitated. Evan leaned down. "I'm right here." Malik walked up. He spoke about wanting to build things, about liking numbers, about maybe starting his own company one day. Micah went next, talking about drawing and stories. When they finished, applause filled the room. Not loud, not performative, real. Afterward, a boy approached them quietly. "That your dad?" he asked. Malik paused. "No," he said, "but he showed up." Something in his voice sounded proud. Later that evening, Evan sat alone again, this time not in doubt, but in reflection. He realized the rising tension wasn't just about whether he could stay. It was about whether the world would allow him to. Black men stepping into visible caregiving roles were still questioned, still scrutinized, still treated as suspect. But walking away would only confirm what people already believed. That night, Evan made a decision. Not dramatic, not announced. Just solid. The next day, he began paperwork with a family lawyer. Not adoption, not yet. Guardianship support, long-term mentorship, legal clarity. Mrs. Johnson cried when he told her. "I ain't never had help that didn't come with strings," she said. "There are no strings," Evan replied, "just responsibility." When the boys found out, they didn't celebrate. They asked questions. How long? What if you move? What if you change your mind? Evan answered each one honestly. And that honesty did something powerful. It didn't erase fear, but it gave it less control. The rising action wasn't loud. It was built in school hallways, dinner tables, and quiet car rides. In every moment, Evan chose presence over convenience. And in every moment, Malik and Micah slowly learned that not everyone who comes is planning to leave. The day everything came to a head did not begin with drama. It began quietly, almost deceptively normal. Malik and Micah woke up early, dressed themselves without being reminded, and sat at the small kitchen table eating toast while Mrs. Johnson watched them with tired eyes. Evan arrived right on time, keys already in hand, posture steady. No rushing, no excuses. Today was the school's community assembly, a public event. Parents, teachers, local officials, even a few reporters. The school was presenting its Family and Future Initiative, a program inspired, though no one said it out loud, by what had started with two boys asking a question that made adults uncomfortable. The twins knew something was coming. They didn't know what. As they walked through the school gates, Malik noticed the extra security. The banners, the murmurs. Micah squeezed his hand. "You nervous?" Micah asked. "Yeah," Malik said. "You." "Always." Inside the auditorium, the atmosphere was tense, polished, and brittle. Smiles that didn't quite relax. Conversations that paused when Evan passed by. Some parents nodded respectfully. Others watched him like they were waiting for him to slip. Mrs. Johnson took her seat in the front row. Evan sat beside the twins, not in the parent section, not on stage, exactly where he belonged. The principal opened the assembly with practiced enthusiasm. She spoke about unity, about support, about how schools were more than buildings, they were communities. Then she invited a representative from the school board to speak. That's when the temperature changed. The man at the podium adjusted his microphone and cleared his throat. "In light of recent events," he began, "we feel it's important to address boundaries." Malik stiffened. Micah leaned closer to Evan. The board member continued, careful but pointed. He spoke about policies, about safety, about how outside involvement needed to be handled responsibly. Evan felt the shift instantly. This wasn't a speech. It was a warning. Then came the sentence that split the room. "While mentorship can be positive," the man said, "we must ensure that no child is emotionally misled or promised something that cannot be guaranteed." Whispers erupted. Malik's chest tightened. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. He had heard this before, in different words, different voices. "Don't hope too much. Don't get attached. People leave." Micah whispered, "They talking about us." Evan stood. Not abruptly, not angrily. Just decisively. Every head turned. "I'd like to respond," Evan said. The principal hesitated, cameras lifted, the board member froze. "This wasn't scheduled," the principal began. "I know," Evan said, "but neither was what started all this." Silence fell. Evan stepped toward the stage, then stopped halfway. He didn't climb it. He stayed grounded, eye level with the audience. "I've been talked about a lot," he said calmly. "My intentions, my presence, my role." He looked directly at the board. "But the people being discussed the least are the kids." The room shifted. "I didn't come here to play hero," Evan continued. "And I didn't come here to replace anyone. I came because two boys asked a question most adults are too afraid to answer honestly." Malik's hands trembled. Micah held them tighter. Evan turned toward the twins, not dramatically, just naturally. "When you asked me to be your dad," Evan said, voice steady but thickening, "you weren't asking for a title. You were asking if someone would stay." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "And I told you I couldn't promise something I hadn't earned." He paused. "But I can promise this," Evan said, now addressing everyone. "I will never shame a child for asking for stability, and I will never step away just because it makes adults uncomfortable." The board member shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Cole, with respect, this isn't about comfort, it's about responsibility." Evan nodded, "Exactly." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "I've worked with legal counsel," he said. "With their guardian's full consent, everything documented, everything transparent." Mrs. Johnson stood then. "Not planned, not asked." She walked forward, her back straight, her voice calm but unshakable. "I buried my son," she said. I buried my daughter-in-law, and every day I wake up praying I can give these boys what I don't have. Her eyes swept the room. This man didn't promise miracles. He promised presence. And if you think that's dangerous, maybe ask yourselves why so many children grow up without it. The silence that followed was different. Heavier, truer. Then something unexpected happened. One of the teachers stood, then another parent, then a man near the back who had been quiet the entire time. "My dad never came to my school stuff," the man said. "I turned out fine, but I remember." A woman added, "My son's father works 3 jobs. A mentor saved him." The room began to breathe again, but differently now. Not divided. Reflective. The board member cleared his throat. "This isn't about denying support," he said carefully. "It's about ensuring emotional safety." Evan nodded once more. "Then let me say this clearly," he said. "If the question is whether I'll disappear, don't ask the kids, ask me." He turned to Malik and Micah. "I can't be your dad today," Evan said. "Not by law, not by title." Malik's throat tightened. Micah's eyes burned. "But I can say this," Evan continued. "I'm not leaving, not when it's hard, not when it's inconvenient, and not when people tell me to step back." He placed a hand on each boy's shoulder. "If one day you decide you don't need me," Evan said, "I'll respect that, but until then, I'm here." The room broke. Not into chaos, into emotion. Mrs. Johnson cried openly now, teachers wiped eyes, parents held their children tighter. The principal stepped forward slowly. "This school," she said, voice unsteady, "wasn't prepared for the question these boys asked." She looked at Malik and Micah. "But maybe we should have been." The board member nodded reluctantly. "We will review our stance." It wasn't a victory speech. It was a turning point. As the assembly ended, reporters rushed forward, but Evan shielded the twins gently. "No interviews," he said. "They've done enough." Outside, Malik finally spoke. "You really staying?" he asked quietly. Evan knelt in front of him, eyes level. "Yes," he said, "and I'll keep proving it." Micah exhaled shakily, "Even if we mess up." Evan smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just real. "Especially then." As they walked away together, no titles, no guarantees, just commitment, the crowd watched in silence. Not because they were stunned, but because they had just witnessed something rare. A man choosing responsibility over applause. Children choosing courage over silence. And a system for once being forced to listen. The truth had been spoken, and nothing would be the same again. The weeks after the assembly unfolded without fanfare, but nothing about them felt ordinary. There were no press conferences, no victory speeches, no official announcements declaring a happy ending. Life didn't shift in one dramatic motion. It adjusted in smaller, steadier ways, like a house settling after a storm. Malik and Micah returned to school the following Monday, expecting eyes on them. They were right, but the looks were different now. Some classmates smiled instead of whispering. A few asked quiet questions, careful not to cross lines. Others avoided them altogether, unsure how to act around boys who had accidentally forced adults to look at themselves. The twins didn't change overnight. They were still kids, still bickered over cereal, still forgot homework, still raced each other down the hallway. But something fundamental had eased inside them. They no longer walked like they were borrowing space. Evan kept showing up. Not perfectly, not as some idealized figure, just consistently. He attended teacher conferences and listened more than he spoke. He sat through long meetings about reading levels and behavior plans. He learned which subjects Malik loved and which ones made Micah shut down. He learned how both boys reacted to disappointment, Malik growing quiet, Micah growing sharp. Mrs. Johnson watched all of this with cautious gratitude. She didn't step aside, she didn't hand over responsibility. She stayed exactly where she had always been, at the center of her grandsons' lives. Evan respected that. He never tried to take her place. He asked questions. He deferred. He showed her his plans before making decisions. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't carrying everything alone. The school changed too, slowly and imperfectly. The principal introduced new guidelines for family events, Less focus on titles, more focus on support systems. Career Day became Community Day. Father's Day assemblies were replaced with broader celebrations of caregivers. Not everyone approved. Some parents still muttered about boundaries and fairness. A few quietly pulled their children from certain activities, but others leaned in. They volunteered, they mentored, they started asking harder questions about what kids really needed. Evan never commented publicly on any of it. He turned down interviews, declined features. When asked why, he gave the same answer every time. "This isn't a story," he said. "It's a responsibility." At home, the changes were more personal. Malik started sleeping through the night. Micah stopped flinching when adults raised their voices. On evenings when Evan stayed late, the boys would sit on either side of him on the couch, not clinging, not distant, just close enough to feel steady. Sometimes they talked about the future. Other times they talked about nothing at all. That was the part Evan cherished most, the ordinary moments, the ones that never went viral, the ones no one applauded. There were still hard days. Days when Evan missed a call and felt the old fear rise in the boy's eyes. Days when Micah tested limits just to see if they still existed. Days when Malik asked questions Evan didn't yet know how to answer. Why didn't our dad stay longer? Why did Mom get sick? Why do people leave? Evan never lied. "I don't know," he said when he didn't, "but I know this, I'm here now." And slowly, that answer became enough. Mrs. Johnson's health stabilized with help Evan arranged quietly. Better doctors, manageable schedules, support she hadn't known how to ask for. She resisted at first, pride strong as ever. "I ain't helpless," she reminded him. "I know," Evan said. "That's why I'm helping." The boys noticed her smiling more, laughing louder, sitting down without wincing. One evening, as they washed dishes together, Micah looked up at Evan and asked, "You still scared?" Evan paused. "Yeah," he said honestly, "sometimes." Micah nodded satisfied. "Me too." That shared truth mattered. Months passed. The internet moved on as it always did. New stories replaced old ones. Comment sections quieted, but the real work continued off-screen. Evan filed more paperwork. Long-term guardianship plans were reviewed and adjusted. Everything slow, everything careful, nothing rushed. One afternoon, Malik came home with a drawing. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a school. One small, one slightly taller, one grown. No labels. Just together. He handed it to Evan without a word. Evan didn't hang it immediately. He didn't want to make a show of it. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, he placed it on his desk. He stared at it for a long time. For years, Evan had believed success was about control, money, structure, independence. He had built walls so high that nothing unexpected could touch him. The twins had walked straight through those walls with a single question. Not demanding. Not entitled. Just honest. And in answering them, Evan discovered something he had never learned in any boardroom or balance sheet. Responsibility wasn't a burden. It was an anchor. The school year ended quietly. At the final assembly, Malik and Micah sat with Mrs. Johnson and Evan. No speeches were made about them, no references to what had started it all. There were just 2 kids finishing a year. As students filed out, the principal stopped Evan briefly. "You changed more than you know," she said. Evan shook his head. They did. Outside, Malik tugged on Evan's sleeve. "You coming next year too?" he asked, casual but careful. Evan answered without hesitation, "Yeah." Micah grinned, "Good." They walked home together under the afternoon sun. No promises shouted. No titles declared. No fairytale ending wrapped in a bow. Just a man who stayed. A grandmother who didn't have to carry everything alone. And 2 boys who learned, slowly, safely, that asking for love didn't always end in loss. Not this time. And that made all the difference. This story isn't about wealth. It isn't about fame or recognition. It's about something far more rare and far more powerful, presence. In a world where children are often left to navigate silence, absence, and broken promises, the simple act of showing up becomes revolutionary. Malik and Micah didn't ask for riches. They didn't ask for toys, trips, or speeches. They asked for one thing, someone who wouldn't leave. And in asking, they revealed the quiet truth that too many adults forget. Children measure love not by words or gifts, but by constancy, by commitment, and by the courage to stand beside them when it matters most. Evan Cole didn't step into their lives to save them or to be praised. He stepped in because he remembered what it felt like to hope and be disappointed. He chose responsibility over convenience, action over indifference. And in doing so, he became more than a mentor. He became a living example of how accountability, care, and respect can transform lives. The moral is clear. True impact doesn't come from grand gestures or public recognition. It comes from the quiet, sometimes uncomfortable, decision to be present when the world expects you to step away. For every child who has asked for help and been ignored, and for every adult who has walked past pain thinking it isn't their responsibility, this story is a call to courage. Showing up is not always easy. It may disrupt routines, challenge assumptions, or expose vulnerabilities, but it changes everything. It teaches trust. It builds confidence. And most importantly, it creates the possibility for love, stability, and growth where before there was uncertainty and fear. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let it remind you that no act of presence is too small. Every time you choose to stay, listen, or care, you are rewriting the story for someone who might otherwise grow up thinking the world has forgotten them. Malik and Micah found their anchor in Evan, not because he was perfect, but because he chose to stay. And that choice, that simple commitment, is the kind of courage that can heal generations. The lesson is simple yet profound. Presence matters. Consistency matters. Care matters. And sometimes the most heroic act is the one no one else notices, but everyone it touches remembers forever.